35-year-old Alexander Turner was sitting just beneath the VIP stands at the final game of the NBA Finals at Crypto.com Arena in Los Angeles. The crowd's thunderous cheers shook the arena, stadium lights glittered across the polished hardwood floor, but Alexander's mind was completely blank. Just as the ball handler was about to take the decisive shot, his phone vibrated. When he looked at the screen, Alexander saw a cold message from Jonathan Price, his boss at Apex Consulting, a technology consulting firm headquartered in New York City. "You are not worthy of your current position. Pack up your desk today." No explanation, no whispered apologies. Just one line of text that felt like a knife to the chest. His heart pounded so hard he could barely breathe. Fans around him erupted in celebration, but Alexander's world turned gray. The big screen was replaying images of the Los Angeles Lakers clinching the Western Conference championship, while he was being shown the door. 6 years of building relationships, 6 years of courting clients from the East Coast to the West Coast, 6 years of missing cozy family dinners to eat instant noodles in hotel rooms, attending afternoon meetings with CEOs in San Francisco and Denver. All that effort turned to ashes with a single tap of a finger. He sat motionless, running through the mental ledger of the numbers he had created. 60 contracts, totaling $100 million, accounting for 45% of Apex Consulting's Western U.S. revenue. He had been the one to take the company from having no offices in Los Angeles, San Diego, or Portland, to the point where skyscrapers stretching from Denver to San Diego now bore the Apex logo. But Jonathan Price had never acknowledged that effort. Once, when their biggest client, Orion Biotech, had turned them down, Alexander spent 3 months renegotiating, adjusting the marketing strategy, and even learning Spanish to conquer the Latin American market before finally bringing Orion back. Yet at that time, in Price's eyes, he was just a nuisance. When LeBron's buzzer beater swished through the net, the arena erupted. Alexander only heard a distant echo. He slipped his phone into his pocket, his eyes vacant as he watched the crowd surge onto the court to celebrate. Next to him, a man in his mid-50s with a calm demeanor and a rugged yet refined face looked at him with concern. His deep, hoarse voice carried a slight southern drawl. "You all right?" Alexander squinted, startled to recognize the man in front of him as Benjamin Carter, CEO of Horizon Tech Advisors, the rival firm that had been squeezing Apex Consulting in the California market. Before Alexander could process it, Carter spoke gently. "I know you, Alexander Turner. We met at the Silicon Valley conference last year. You look exhausted." Benjamin's words shattered Alexander's heart into pieces. Why was a longtime enemy showing concern? Not out of friendship, but because he believed Price was about to make a huge mistake. Alexander forced a weak smile. "It's just work stuff," he said, waving his hand as if to brush away the pain in his chest. But inside Alexander's mind, a storm was brewing. He remembered the first time he'd walked into Apex Consulting 6 years earlier. At that time, the Manhattan headquarters had only a handful of international staff, and no one believed a 31-year-old manager from Dallas could conquer such a vast market in Los Angeles. He had to learn to win over local tech executives by organizing low-key workshops at Silicon Beach, and after a year of persistence, he finally closed his first deal with Meridian Robotics. That $2 million contract paved the way for dozens of other clients, generating tens of millions of dollars in value in the first year. Alexander's meticulousness extended beyond business relationships. He always put his wife and 2 young children, 8-year-old Ethan and 6-year-old Madison, first. Even though he frequently flew between New York, Denver, and San Diego, he still made an effort to video call his sister-in-law, attentively listening to his children's laughter echoing in the middle of the night as they called "Dad, Dad." And he had promised to take his whole family to Disneyland this summer. Now all those promises felt cold under the glare of the arena lights. Back in reality, as the feverish energy in the arena began to subside, Alexander decided to leave his seat. He wandered down the corridor, trying to conceal the blur at the corner of his eye. Every step felt like another jolt of pain, because he knew full well that that senior executive seat had been reserved for those who knew how to leverage connections rather than those who were truly talented. Jonathan Price, the man who had once promised him company stock options and a lucrative commission, had betrayed him. All of Price's promises had been nothing but empty words. Flashbacks surged, and Alexander felt the veins in his throat throb. Perhaps for the first time in his life, he felt cruelly betrayed. But instead of collapsing, a fire ignited inside him. He thought of the morning before, when Price had texted the entire department, "Revenue is down 5% compared to last year. Everyone must be held accountable." Meanwhile, he was the one who had covered most of that shortfall with the Orion Biotech deal. Between the pressure from rival firms and from shareholders, everything was focused on one person, and Alexander was the easiest target. Then an idea flickered. This was the moment to turn the tide. Seeing Benjamin Carter standing at the far end of the hallway, Alexander approached him. "Mr. Carter," he said softly, "thank you for asking." Carter tilted slightly and nodded. "You deserve to know the real reason. Apex Consulting is sinking into trouble. I just reviewed an internal report. They rely too much on their software solutions division, while the market is shifting heavily toward cloud services and artificial intelligence." Hearing this, Alexander squinted, trying to fully absorb what his longtime rival was revealing. "You mean, I want to offer you an opportunity," Benjamin continued, his voice warm yet resolute. "Horizon Tech Advisors needs a head of business development for the Southwest region. With your experience, I believe you could rebuild that division within a year, or I'll take full responsibility." The offer was like a life raft in a stormy sea. Alexander's knees wobbled slightly, then he looked deep into Benjamin's eyes. "I didn't expect you." "Life doesn't always go as planned," Benjamin said with a smile. "I've valued your abilities for a long time, even when you thought I was just after Apex's clients." The light from the corridor windows streamed in at an angle, casting mottled patterns on the tiled floor. Alexander felt the weight of the future pressing on him. He remembered the image of his two little ones just finishing their homework about their new office. He had promised his brother-in-law to buy a house in Orange County so the kids would have plenty of room to play. Now this upheaval was not just a personal shock, it was an opportunity to prove his true worth without relying on price. The decision formed in an instant. Alexander lifted his chin and, in a low, steady voice, said, "I accept." That night, he video-called his wife and showed the kids 2 plane tickets and a map of California, where the family would move in 1 month. Tears of joy welled in 8-year-old Ethan's eyes. "Dad, will I learn to surf?" Alexander smiled gently. "Yes, son. I'll make it up to you in every way." But the story didn't end there. The next morning, Alexander prepared his performance portfolio and the official offer letter. On his way in, he thought back to when he first started his career, naive but brimming with ambition to conquer. He realized that the pain of betrayal was merely a stepping stone on his path to new glory. Under the pale dawn light on Santa Monica Boulevard, Alexander vowed to himself, "I will never let anyone crush my career again." The open ending hinted at a bright future. Alexander Turner, once cast onto the street by 2 lines in a text message, now held a golden opportunity at Horizon Tech Advisors. He was ready to begin a new chapter, building a new business empire, strengthening his family, and taking revenge with spectacular success. All of Jonathan Price's mistakes would one day be paid for, and Alexander needed only a flawless strategy and unwavering resolve. Rising above it all, he planted in readers' minds the belief that no matter how hard you're beaten down, you must stand up stronger and conquer yourself. Before Alexander could even recover from the shock of "clear out your desk today," another realization hit. He was under siege from every direction. Instead of consulting him, Jonathan Price had appointed his nephew, Brandon Price, as Vice President of Southwest Regional Relations. Brandon had never once set foot in San Diego, Los Angeles, or Denver. He only spoke English and knew nothing about West Coast business culture, but he was family. And that was the first test, proving who really held power at Apex Consulting. 3 weeks earlier, Alexander had accidentally discovered that Jonathan was secretly taking calls from North Star Biotech in San Francisco, calls that should have gone through him. When Alexander confronted him, Jonathan merely shrugged and said, I'm optimizing the process. Don't worry about matters beyond your scope." At that moment, Alexander looked at Jonathan with stunned confusion. He had always believed he was indispensable to the company. He never realized Jonathan had undervalued 5 years of his hard work. At home, his wife, Emily Turner, had already noticed the unusual change in his eyes. Once, she gently warned, "Honey, assigning Brandon to your department isn't normal. People never put family into a business unless they intend to replace or push someone out." Alexander remembered laughing awkwardly and saying, "You're worrying too much. I've been here for 6 years. I know the West Coast market better than anyone." But Emily's words haunted him night after night, like a warning bell. Alexander had always believed that with his strong relationships in San Francisco, New York, and Houston, like the 3-year deal with Pioneer Biotech in Silicon Valley, the full trust from Keith Weber at Hudson Innovations, and the renewal request from Vanessa Morales at PrairieSoft Technologies in Atlanta, he was irreplaceable. But the brutal reality was that Brandon had been secretly sabotaging his meetings, whispering to Jonathan that Alexander was spending too much time catering to West Coast clients, even putting their interests above the company's profits. Gradually, Jonathan came to believe that having Brandon in Houston was enough to maintain the network, while Alexander was distracted by his trips between Los Angeles and Denver. Jonathan's grand slam move was to send Alexander to Los Angeles to attend a gala honoring a new partner, a reward that should have recognized his tireless contributions. Instead, he was tucked away in a corner of the VIP room, far from his New York desk, so that when the harsh message arrived, Alexander had no chance to gather his files, call clients immediately, or stop the bad news from spreading internally. Alexander sat alone under the bright lights of the Staples Center stage, commentary echoing in his ears but completely unheard. Every word of Jonathan's message spun through his mind. "You are not worthy." The humiliation went beyond losing his job. It was a ruthless attack on his honor and his family. Emily was home taking care of the little ones, unaware that her husband was facing the most terrifying game of intrigue he'd ever known. In that moment, Alexander saw Benjamin Carter leaning in from across the hallway, his expression filled with sympathy. Benjamin had never genuinely praised anyone in the past 6 years like he did now. "I know you just received some bad news," Benjamin said softly, his voice warm. Alexander went silent and looked straight into the eyes of his former rival. The old animosity suddenly gave way to a surprising opportunity. Alexander's heart pounded as he told Benjamin about Brandon's manipulation, how he had convinced Jonathan that Alexander was too close to West Coast clients. Benjamin listened and nodded. "I have an offer for you. Horizon Tech Advisors is missing a director of business development for the Southwest region. With your experience, especially how you built things from Atlanta to Denver, I believe you can make that division strong within 1 year. I'll ensure you have all the authority and budget you need." The proposal was a powerful jolt to Alexander's fragile pride. He remembered those late nights calling home, telling his 2 kids, "This summer, I'll teach you to surf at Huntington Beach." Those promises had given Emily hope. Now, Alexander realized he had to rise up so his family could continue to believe in him. As the crowd began to file out of the arena, Alexander took a deep breath, gripped Benjamin's hand, and quietly said, "I want to do this with you." The darkness that had shrouded him was instantly replaced by a sense of restored self-worth. Under the dim golden lights of a Los Angeles evening, he understood that Jonathan Price was the one who had made the mistake. Alexander not only lost his job, he lost the false trust Jonathan had shown him. He had the chance to rebuild from the ground up, but on a bigger stage where he truly belonged. The road ahead promised to be far from easy. Alexander would have to renegotiate with Pioneer Biotech, win back Keith Weber's trust, and convince Vanessa Morales that 6 years of loyalty had never faded. But those challenges no longer fazed him. One storm had just passed, making way for a new one, the power game at Horizon Tech Advisors and his determination to prove himself. People would soon see Alexander Turner rise from that wound, stronger, wiser, and refusing to let anyone ever harm him again. At all costs, he would show that when those in power turn their backs, true success can still sprout from the ruins. And this was only the beginning. Alexander Turner looked up, his eyes still on his phone, as Benjamin Carter, Chief Executive Officer of Horizon Tech Advisors, nodded and smiled. He reached out to take the phone as if it were a prize. "You've just received some incredible news," Benjamin said softly. "Perhaps we should talk it over at dinner. I know a fantastic restaurant near the Louvre." Alexander took a deep breath amid the roar of the arena. His heart pounded faster at the thought of dining with Benjamin, the rival who had now become his benefactor. The next day, Alexander returned to Houston beneath a gray sky and a cold, drizzling rain. He knew it would be the last time he set foot in Apex Consulting's headquarters. His steps halted in front of the glass panel bearing the company logo, and then he slowly walked into the empty lobby. Each footstep echoed down the hallway, as if marking the end of one chapter. Entering the conference room, he found Jonathan Price seated beside Brandon Price and Jennifer Collins, head of human resources. Jonathan's face attempted a friendly expression, but his eyes betrayed his awkwardness at facing Alexander. "Alexander," Jonathan said, his tone cloyingly sweet as if putting on a performance, "how was your trip to New York City?" Alexander sat down across from him, clutching his briefcase and watching Jennifer as she placed a thick stack of papers in front of him. "Here are your termination documents, non-compete agreement, and a list of company property to return." Alexander skimmed through the pages. "Everything is in order," Jonathan said, forcing himself to remain calm under Alexander's icy stare. "We've decided to restructure the West Coast division under Brandon's leadership. You are no longer required to continue working here." Brandon sat next to Jonathan, a subtle smirk on his face. He was only 27 years old, fresh from earning an MBA at a mid-tier school in Houston, with zero experience in international markets. But family carried more weight with Jonathan than any real qualifications. Alexander opened his mouth, his voice calm but every word heavy. "What about my relationships with PrairieSoft Technologies, Hudson Innovations, and Pioneer Biotech?" Jonathan merely shrugged. "Those are company clients. Brandon will take over from here." Alexander offered no argument. He simply stood, walked over to shake Jonathan's hand, and said evenly, "I wish you and Brandon success." Jonathan was taken aback. "I never expected you to be so gracious," he stammered. Alexander nodded, then walked over to his desk. Brandon hurried to sit in Alexander's old chair and began chatting animatedly with colleagues about a West Coast strategy. Alexander quietly cleared his belongings, carefully folding the family photo, a picture of his wife and children smiling brightly on a vacation in Mexico. The memory of Ethan's grin when he received his first surfboard still lingered. His promise to take the whole family to Huntington Beach this summer had drifted away with the wind. Alexander tucked some personal papers into a box and then strode through the quiet office, leaving behind Brandon's and Jennifer's curious gazes. On Tuesday morning, Alexander received a call from Christopher Lawson, Regional Director at Hudson Innovations. Christopher's voice was low and worried. "Alexander? What's happening at Apex? They cut off our video conference at the last minute. Brandon didn't know anything about the expansion contract." Alexander stayed composed. "There are some management changes. I'll be in touch soon to clarify." A knock on the door followed, and in came Marie Delgado from PrairieSoft Technologies. "If you're no longer with Apex, we need to renegotiate our contract before the deadline." Call after call came in like thunderclaps, jolting Alexander awake from his daze. On Wednesday, Jonathan began calling relentlessly, leaving a string of anxious messages. "Alexander, we've been misunderstanding each other. Can you reconsider? I'm willing to return your equity." Each message reverberated in Alexander's mind like a downpour, but he didn't look back. He had found a new path. Brandon, in his effort to assert power, convened a remote meeting with a potential client, but was disconnected after 14 minutes for his lack of knowledge. Jennifer Collins ran back and forth trying to smooth things over, but everything was beyond repair. On Friday afternoon, the email from Pioneer Biotech hit like a bullet. "We are officially canceling our $15 million contract due to the change in management." Alexander leaned against the wide window frame and watched traffic rush by. The light rain fell, and he tilted his face upward to feel each cold drop on his skin. His heart stilled, but a new resolve surged. This was his opportunity to prove his true worth. That weekend, Alexander signed his employment letter with Horizon Tech Advisors at the villa atop Hollywood Hills. The black and white text could not convey the surge of excitement coursing through him. Emily held his hand tightly over video chat. "You'll be okay, right?" "We will be fine," Alexander replied with a gentle smile. On Monday afternoon, he walked into Apex Consulting for the last time. The drizzle still fell, dampening Elm Street as it led to the building. He moved silently past the front, glancing at the conference room, where Jonathan and Brandon were waiting. They must have expected him to plead or break down, but his heart was harder than it had ever been. Signing without a word, Alexander said to Jonathan, "Goodbye, Apex." He stepped out, leaving behind the frosted glass door where false power had revealed the incompetent. Now Alexander turned toward Horizon Tech Advisors with a completely different mindset. Rather than collapse, he would rebuild everything on the foundation of his skills, his reputation, and his love for his family. He envisioned those meetings with Pioneer Biotech, Hudson Innovations, and PrairieSoft Technologies partners who trusted him as a friend, not merely clients. He would put them at the center, rather than chasing short-term financial gain. In the late spring chill, Alexander saw the dawn breaking over the Los Angeles skyline, heralding a new chapter. He knew the road ahead would be full of obstacles, but those challenges would forge him into something sharper. Alexander Turner's story had never truly ended. That night, Jonathan Price showed up at Alexander's apartment, his face full of anger. "This is absurd, Alexander. You're sabotaging our client relationships just out of spite," Jonathan snarled, his hand pressing against the door. Alexander only stared back, his gaze cold. "I'm not sabotaging anything," he replied. "I'm just not willing to save you from Brandon's incompetence." Jonathan drew a long breath, his expression stunned to realize that Alexander wasn't afraid to confront him. "What do you want? A higher salary? A bigger title?" Alexander answered, his voice steady. "I don't need anything from you anymore, Jonathan. You've chosen your path in New York City." On Saturday morning, Alexander's phone rang. It was Jennifer Collins, head of human resources. Her voice was hoarse with exhaustion. "Alexander, this has to stay confidential. Did you know about Brandon's hiring before it was announced?" Alexander was taken aback. "I didn't know anything. I always thought it was just nepotism," he replied. Jennifer continued cautiously. "I reviewed the records and noticed many irregularities. Jonathan backdated Brandon's hire date to 3 months ago, but in reality, Brandon only started working 2 weeks ago. His salary is even higher than your previous pay." Alexander felt stunned. He vaguely realized the depth of the conspiracy. Before he could gather himself, Jennifer revealed more. "Jonathan has been forwarding all your client emails to his own account for the past 6 weeks, and then telling them you would be resigning soon. It was all planned long ago." In Alexander's mind, the trip to New York City no longer seemed like a reward, but merely an opportunity for Jonathan to execute his scheme behind his back. Jennifer exhaled, as though trying to keep calm. "That's not all. Jonathan is negotiating with a consulting firm in Miami to sell the West Coast client list. He told them you're unreliable and that the company needs a professional manager." Anger and outrage surged in Alexander's chest. Jonathan had not only replaced him with his nephew, but was now planning to sell the division Alexander had painstakingly built. "When will this deal be finalized?" Alexander asked, his voice gravelly. "The preliminary agreement was signed 2 weeks ago," Jennifer said. "The transfer is expected to occur next month." Jonathan had orchestrated a perfect plan. Fire Alexander, install Brandon as interim manager, then hand the division over to the Miami firm for a substantial profit. Brandon would collect a bonus and a glowing recommendation, while Jonathan would be hailed as a strategic mastermind. But Jonathan had overlooked one crucial detail: the clients. Alexander's brand was built on trust and strong relationships with his partners. Christopher Lawson at Hudson Innovations would never accept a company suddenly changing managers, and Marie Delgado at PrairieSoft Technologies would immediately terminate the contract if Alexander were gone. Even the project with North Star Pharmaceuticals in Minneapolis was ready to withdraw as soon as they heard the news. In Alexander's head, his own voice echoed, "If they're unhappy, they will find someone else." He didn't need to speculate. Once Alexander reemerged, clients would be eager to listen. He immediately called Benjamin Carter in New York. A few hours later, Benjamin returned the call. "Alexander, talk to me right now. Something big is happening with Apex's West Coast division." Alexander explained everything, Jonathan's plan to sell to Miami and how clients would react. Benjamin was silent for a moment, then said, "This is perfect for us. If Jonathan intends to sell, it means he has given up on maintaining those client relationships." Alexander nodded, feeling as though he held a powerful weapon. "The clients will seek alternatives immediately," he said. Benjamin chuckled over the phone. "Exactly. Can you come to New York as soon as possible?" "I'll be there by Wednesday," Alexander replied without hesitation. "I'll prepare the contract and paperwork," Benjamin said. "List every client relationship you can bring." In that moment, Alexander realized Jonathan's mistake had become his greatest opportunity for a comeback. That night, he sat in front of his computer, compiling a list of Pioneer Biotech, Hudson Innovations, PrairieSoft Technologies, North Star Pharmaceuticals, and several smaller partners. Each client was proof of his ability, not only in revenue, but also in dedication and understanding of local business cultures. Now he was no longer an employee cast aside. He was a decision-maker, ready to rebuild everything on his own solid foundation. Under the pale yellow glow of the living room lamp, he felt every beat of his excitement for the future. Jonathan Price might determine the fate of Apex's West Coast unit, but Alexander Turner held the key to unlocking a new era of success for Horizon Tech Advisors. Jonathan Price thought he was executing a clever move, but he had actually handed all the pieces to his opponent. Alexander Turner flew to California on Tuesday evening and spent Wednesday morning in Benjamin Carter's office finalizing the contract. The terms exceeded all expectations. Director of U.S. Operations with a substantial equity stake and full autonomy over his client relationships. Alexander couldn't hide his satisfied grin as he held the signed contract. Benjamin had prepared meticulously. Horizon Tech Advisors had sought to penetrate the U.S. market for 3 years, but lacked relationships and local cultural knowledge. Bringing Alexander on board solved both problems immediately. "Your timing is brilliant," Benjamin said as they reviewed the contract. "We've been building infrastructure in the U.S. for months, but we needed someone who understands both markets." Alexander nodded, pride and determination swelling within him. By Thursday, Alexander began calling each key client. Christopher Lawson at Hudson Innovations was first. Alexander gently announced, "I've joined Horizon Tech Advisors and will continue supporting your technology project from California." Christopher replied immediately, "This is far better. Horizon Tech Advisors has a solid reputation in Europe. When can we proceed with the contract transfer?" Alexander promised their legal liaison would meet them next week. Marie Delgado at PrairieSoft Technologies was equally thrilled. She had been frustrated with Brandon Price's handling and now breathed a sigh of relief knowing Alexander would continue managing her account. "Finally, someone who understands our business," she said. "Send over the transfer paperwork right away." Even North Star Pharmaceuticals in Minneapolis, though more cautious, agreed to a meeting. That day, Alexander thought to himself, after 6 years of perseverance, clients finally recognized the real value of his international expertise. By Friday afternoon, Alexander had finalized deals with 6 major clients totaling $50 million. 3 other clients wanted to schedule detailed discussions. Meanwhile, at Apex Consulting's headquarters, Brandon Price was still struggling to convince clients he could handle the work. However, Brandon grew increasingly flustered and panicked whenever he texted or video called clients. Everything unfolded according to the hidden plan. While Jonathan focused on negotiating the sale of the European division, the trap closed. On Monday morning, chaos erupted at Meridian Solutions' office. Christopher Lawson's attorney sent letters terminating 3 separate contracts. Marie Delgado demanded the immediate return of all proprietary documents. North Star Pharmaceuticals abruptly canceled their negotiation meeting. Exactly at 9 a.m., Alexander's phone buzzed. "Alexander, what are you doing? Your clients are abandoning everything." It was Jonathan's voice, thinly veiled with malice. Alexander smiled and replied decisively, I'm working for Horizon Tech Advisors. My clients chose to follow me. Jonathan's tone tightened. You can't do that, your non-compete agreement. Alexander cut him off. I consulted my lawyer. Horizon Tech Advisors is headquartered in California, not Houston. The non-compete clause does not apply to an international firm. Nearly 30 seconds of silence followed on the other end. Finally, Jonathan spat out, You're destroying our European division. Alexander answered calmly, No, that was your doing when you fired me by text. As the noise subsided, Alexander still felt the aftershocks of that dramatic confrontation. By Tuesday, more termination letters had gone out. By Wednesday, the Miami consulting firm was questioning the value of buying a European division with no clients. On Thursday afternoon, Jennifer Collins called again. Jonathan is completely panicked. The deal with Miami collapsed. Brandon resigned yesterday and the board is demanding explanations. They have lost 70% of their European revenue in just 1 week. On Friday morning, Benjamin called with an update. North Star Pharmaceuticals wants to move forward with us. They've offered $15 million over 3 years. Alexander stifled his excitement, feeling as if he had reached the pinnacle of his career. Benjamin continued, You've done an outstanding job. Oh, and I have an interesting call from Jennifer Collins. She wants to discuss an opportunity at Horizon Tech Advisors. While Jonathan and Brandon were drowning in wreckage, the best talent was leaping off the ship before it sank. In that moment, Alexander recalled Jonathan's scornful words, Pathetic employees like you don't deserve success. Now, the man who called him pathetic would taste true failure. Alexander Turner's journey of vengeance, waged through clever strategy and steadfast perseverance, had not only secured him lucrative contracts, but also cemented the conviction that when someone places their trust in you, no matter how formidable the obstacles, justice and talent will ultimately prevail. 3 weeks after Jonathan fired him in New York City, Alexander received a call from Benjamin Carter. The late afternoon winter sunlight filtered through the California office window, and Benjamin beamed with satisfaction. The board at Apex Consulting just voted to remove Jonathan from his regional director post, he announced. They consider the loss of $87 million in contract revenue an unforgivable offense. A quiet sense of satisfaction welled up inside Alexander, though he felt no ostentatious joy. Jonathan had engineered his own downfall through greed, arrogance, and underestimating the value of the relationships Alexander had painstakingly built. Benjamin sat back, his expression turning serious. There's more, he added. Brandon Price is spreading rumors that you deliberately sabotaged the European division out of spite. Alexander offered a cold smile. Let them talk, he said. Benjamin nodded, satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. Jennifer Collins preserved all the evidence, the forwarded emails, the falsified hiring records, and the agreement to sell the European division to that German firm. Everything is documented. The irony was that Jonathan's elaborate scheme had left behind a paper trail proving his malicious intent, not a rash impulse. Alexander closed his eyes and pictured Jonathan standing before the board a few days earlier, desperately trying to explain the plummeting revenue. Instead of hiding the truth, he had used underhanded tactics to force Alexander out, and in the end, those same tactics had betrayed him. Now Jennifer is joining Horizon Tech Advisors as European Operations Manager, Benjamin said. Alexander smiled inwardly, imagining her continuing to safeguard major clients in Los Angeles, Florida, and across Northern Europe. Over the next week, Christopher Lawson at Hudson Innovations officially introduced Alexander to 2 major Los Angeles firms. Meanwhile, the Florida contract with Lakeside Pharma expanded to include research and development in Sweden. The $12 million deal they thought lost was now $18 million over 3 years. Jonathan's failure became the springboard for Horizon Tech Advisors' triumph in Europe. Finally, Alexander couldn't resist checking his phone. An email from Jennifer announced that she was beginning to assemble a new European operations team. He exhaled softly, recalling the last time he saw Jonathan on screen, a haggard face wearing a supermarket uniform in Illinois. His wife Catherine later told him she saw Jonathan waiting in line with groceries, looking so exhausted He probably didn't recognize Alexander even for a second. 6 months later, Alexander was reviewing quarterly reports in his spacious New York City office when Catherine called. "I have some good news to share," she said, her voice brimming with excitement. "Yesterday I ran into Jonathan at the supermarket near our old apartment. Dressed in an apron, he was standing in the checkout line. He looked so weary and haggard." Tears streamed down Alexander's cheeks, not from gloating over Jonathan's downfall, but because he realized that hatred could never bring lasting peace. In contrast, business was booming. Horizon Tech Advisors had exceeded all expectations. They signed 14 major U.S. contracts and opened new offices in Atlanta and Denver, raising their client count to over 200 multinational corporations. The Nordvik deal grew into a collaborative project spanning 5 Nordic countries. Alexander even proposed a mentorship program for startups, aiming to foster the entrepreneurial spirit and American corporate culture tailored for Europe. Most importantly, Alexander had found an environment where ability was the true measure of success. Benjamin Carter treated him as an equal partner rather than a subordinate. They shared rewards instead of engaging in tit-for-tat battles, a philosophy that propelled the company's growth instead of internal conflict. That spring, Catherine officially relocated to California, and they bought a modest home in Greenwich Village. For the first time since the ordeal began, he felt genuine excitement about the future, building a home and a career on his own terms, rather than chasing someone else's ambitions. Then Roland Garros returned to New York City in June. Benjamin sent him a ticket to the hospitality suite that Horizon Tech Advisors had secured. Alexander sat by the window on a high floor, watching the lights twinkle on the Philippe Chatrier court as Rafael Nadal hoisted his 14th championship trophy. In that moment, Alexander wondered if anyone in the audience knew the story behind his victory. Probably not, but he understood that the worst events had brought him to the best possible place. Life can be cunning, arranging tragedy to become its own catalyst. Jonathan's text from New York City, seemingly a career-ending blow, was actually the gift of liberation, offering Alexander the chance to prove himself. He had never thanked Jonathan for that, but perhaps, in a quiet moment, he should express gratitude for the tears and pain that taught him how to rise again.